when I take a look at the complaints and I see what the problems were with them, it seems to me that it is a small minority of these issues where there's actually difficulties.
Let me think about that point, Tony, because I've been doing this for a bunch of years, about 10 years, and in my capacity as the AG, handling this section of the law, it's probably the only time I've ever gotten the town's response before I got a complaint. I really felt that Tony was very proactive in that situation as he just described. Taking that from Sheila or Tiva's perspective, as the person who's being denied the records, and one of the things I wanted to do during this panel discussion is leave you with some practical advice. Instead of just, Tony certainly would have been in his rights just to issue a one-page letter, denying the records, citing the appeal, and sending this gentleman on his way. But given the way that Tony handled it, being more proactive, the person being denied the records, what's the reaction, or does that have some sort of effect on the person being denied the records?
Well, I've been denied a lot of records. I think there's kind of two levels. There's the police report, the walk in the door, and trying to get minutes kind of area. The two issues I've found is that there's just inconsistency from government agency to government agency, kind of echoing a little bit of what Sheila said there. And by and large, Tony said if there's some sort of butting of heads. I've had a lot of positive experience dealing with different town halls, certainly different police departments. They, by and large, do a good job. But again, there's some inconsistency. The requests that get denied tend to be a little more substantive, and they're usually, sometimes they have to do with an ongoing case, not necessarily law enforcement, but something that sends up the ires of the city solicitors of the world, and that they're concerned there's that greater impact. So, the denial, as far as I'm concerned, is a denial. I'm pretty familiar with the routine and trying to make an appeal with whoever the administrative officer is at that point. I know what the steps are, and I'm pretty cognizant of following the steps, and very rarely does it end up with Mike, which is, if it does end up on Mike's desk or Laura's desk, obviously it's a bigger deal. We have to decide as a news outlet if we're going to pursue it to the next step, if we lose through the Attorney General's office, if we're going to go to the judiciary at that point, which is where we go next. But if it ends up on Mike's desk, I know I'm doomed because he's a Yankees fan, and it's not going to go. Yeah. As a Red Sox fan, I'm in trouble there. But anyway, so yeah, those. I guess I'm aware. It doesn't matter how the denial comes. I'm not sure what the question was. It doesn't matter how the denial comes. If it happens, we know what the next step is.
But I think to Mike's question a little bit, you and I know what the next step is, and we've been through the procedure before. But I think certainly I commend you for taking that step. And if you do that routinely, I really commend you and want you to come work in our towns. But especially for a person like that who is seeking records related to something that obviously has an emotional impact, and for you to be able to say, I'm going to take this step, make this process a little bit easier, even if you disagree, you think it's a privileged document, he wants access to it. I think that's a great example of being proactive in something and not having an antagonistic relationship and not just issuing a blank denial and not trying to help the process go forward. And I agree with Tim that we know usually what to do, but again, to my point of a person, a distraught father, or an angered taxpayer, or somebody that doesn't always go through this process, it's really great to have an example like that of being proactive and helping somebody through the process.
Yeah, the Tonys of the world, it up, down, and sideways, and usually gets to that level. I guess my point is, my areas of concern, one, I do think there needs to be legislative change to the Public Records Act. That's a whole other discussion. But the education is key, and I think it's great that the Attorney General's office puts on forums like this, and I know a lot of you people are here because you have to get your ethics requirements in, but nonetheless, it's a good event, and I think that helps the inconsistency with what the actual act is across the state when we come in the door.
I would like to echo that too, and I wrote that down. We've all hit on this a little bit, that there is inconsistency between agency to agency, department to department, town to town, and events like this are really good, I think, in terms of just getting a general awareness and getting up to date and hopefully, you know, eliminating some of those consistencies. So there is a consistent expectation of what's public, how you will be treated, how the process works, and the public needs that information as well. But I think the other, as Tim has referenced, that that's one of the things that in some of the versions of amendments to the public records law that have been proposed is that training would be required. And I don't know how many people are here because they're required to be or because they're getting ethics credits, and I think it's great as many people are here as are here, but to actually require training for the people that will be handling the public records requests. What we run into a lot of times as we're in the daily process of gathering information is if the person who, sometimes there's only one person authorized to handle public records in an agency, and if they're not in, we don't get them. So that's, you know, there is a lot of inconsistency, there's a lot of training and awareness that needs to happen.
Can I jump in on that for a second? Because
Actually, follow. I was going to bring in another point, bring this discussion in another way, but I want to pick up on that point that Sheila just made and ask you, Tony, basically how the town, your towns, handle these public records requests, and whether every request ends up on your desk, or how do you determine whether or not
they don't actually, but very many of them do. I'd like to get to that in a second. For instance, the minutes of public meetings, both towns right now. They understand in the clerk's office that it doesn't have to be minutes that are approved. It just has to be the minutes that they've typed up from the meeting, even if the town council hasn't yet gotten to them. I'd just like to throw in a plug for the town of Lincoln. Not only don't they post their agenda on their town website, but a resident of that town can actually view the packet of materials that the town council members have going into the meeting, which I think is amazing. So, you know, they take great pains, I think, to get as much information out to the public as they possibly can. Here's one difficulty I see with the Access to Public Records Act. What you can't do when a request comes in is ask what the purpose of the request is for. You can't do that.
Why is that a problem?
Well, let me tell you. We just had one coming, not in Lincoln, it was down in Warren. Request for all the records pertaining to the planting of street trees in a defined area during a defined time. Species, where they were planted, all this. It was a very detailed request. And you know, it wasn't sent to the clerk's office, actually sent to the Department of Public Works, which I thought was appropriate because they would be the keeper of those records. Well, I got the call, what's going on here? It was a detailed request. I responded and said, in order to gather those materials, that's not something that was readily available. We have to do some research for it. We have to gather it up. We have to go from there. And you know, I didn't actually. The person who requested was here. I don't see him here now. But they sent back, and he said, "Well, aren't you going to ask me why I'm doing this?" And I said, "Well, I can't. I'm not supposed to." He said, "Okay." I said, "But are you interested in trees?" I was interested in one particular tree. That tree was planted, his house was right on the street line. It's a historic house. The town had street tree plantings on one side, and I learned all this through this, because sometimes you, as lawyers know, you get into a case, you learn stuff. They put hornbeams trees on one side of the street. That tree is columnar, and the roots go down. It's a good street tree. On their side, right in front of their house, they had a maple tree. Now, it got planted 8 years ago. It's 50 feet high. Now, those roots go straight out. It was impacting their foundation. And you know what? They were having trouble painting the house because the thing was here. They didn't really want the records. They wanted somebody to take a look at the tree and see if it was appropriate to be put there in the state that it was, get rid of it, and put in the hornbeams like they had across the street. We found out about that during the Access to the Public Records thing. We didn't say, what do you want this for? But I think sometimes what happens is, if the town or city knows what the request is for, it will make it easier to respond on some of these things, and perhaps get to the root of the problem.